Motherhood, but not quite as we imagine. Thought-provoking, refreshing, straightforward, sometimes taboo, often seemingly ordinary, but always honest. Welcome to School for Mothers, opening conversations we all need to have, exploring ways in which you can be fulfilled as a woman, once a mother. Now, here is your host, mother of 10, Danusha Melina Durban.
I'm Danusha Melina Durban, your host, and today's episode is all about Christmas after separation and divorce, and my special guest is Nina Farr. Nina's a leadership coach, mentor, speaker, and the author of I Am the Parent Who Stayed, Joyfully Parenting Alone. I won't keep you waiting any longer. Let's get started on my conversation all about Christmas after separation and divorce with my wonderful guest, Nina Farr. Hello, Nina. I'm really looking forward to this conversation with you. What an important one. Come on, let's get going.
Hi, Danusha. Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's such a blimmin' important conversation. There's so many women, so many people, men and women who need to think about how you do Christmas and the holiday after you've separated and you've got kids or you've divorced, you're no longer together. And this is something you think about both personally, isn't it? But also with clients. So help us out. Where do we start?
Yeah, so I've been single parenting now for nearly 9 years. I've got 3 children with 2 different dads. So the chaos of holiday season diary management has been part of my life personally for quite a long time. And I've figured out various ways of navigating it. But I also support women who parent alone. So I've seen hundreds of different versions of doing this well and also what happens when it's not done well. So I'm very passionate about supporting people to get it right, or at least as right as they can do year on year. Because one of the things that I think is really important to highlight straight away is that there is no right way. There's no sort of perfect way of navigating emotional, important family time when you've got conflicting needs and desires. And you are going to evolve into that. And some years will be great and some years might be a bit more tricky for lots of reasons.
Yes, it's never a static feast, is it? It's not, it's a movable one.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we can feel, can't we, that how it is it's so intense in the moment that maybe we can get tripped up by thinking it's always going to be like this. But Christmas is particularly very emotional, isn't it? Let alone in COVID.
Yeah, and 2020 is going to throw a whole new set of challenges and conflicts into the conversation. But certainly if it's your first, say, year to 3 years of navigating parenting when you're in a separated situation, a lot of this is going to feel like the first time. It's either the first time that you are not with your child's other parent at Christmas, or it might be the first time that you're not with your children. And that is really difficult. That those experiences of letting go and letting new stuff come in are incredibly difficult. So let's be really upfront about it from the beginning. There's big emotions at play, and it is very easy to get drawn down the rabbit hole of believing that you know what the right thing is and getting very attached to that. The first place I start with people when we think about this season is really thinking about boundaries, not just yours, but other people's. And that can be quite
that's an immediate disappointment, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, let's just have it out there. It's like, oh, damn, it's not just my boundaries and being firm about mine.
Yeah.
It's actually having to listen, consider, maybe even respect their boundaries. Oh, damn it.
Yes. Yeah. And, I always think with this kind of thing, start as you mean to go on, because how you treat somebody the first time that you're dealing with this is going to set the tone for what comes back at you the next time that you have this conversation. And, you've got your boundaries, you've got your ex's boundaries, but as your children grow up, you also need to start thinking about what's important to them. and what do they want to experience at this time of year. And if you set it up that it's your way or the highway, and, you know, their dad doesn't have any say or their other parent doesn't have any say, or that it's going to be a whole load of conflict at this time of year, then the people who are really suffering are the kids. You know, they're the ones that don't actually get to enjoy a holiday season for themselves, because they have to be, you know, sort of showing up and sparkling at whatever their parents want them to show up for.
Well, they start masking, don't they? Yeah. I do. So how do we navigate, how do we identify our boundaries first? Because
okay, so there are two different kinds of boundaries, and I'm only really going to deal with the second kind, but I think it's important that we just acknowledge the first kind before we move on. So the first kind is hard boundaries. If you or your children are not safe, or their relationship with their other parent is not safe, then a hard boundary means a legal one. Getting something in place to protect you and your children. And that's things like child arrangements orders, social services involvement, you know, injunctive relief, things like non-molestation orders, that kind of thing. But that's a big thing that we're not really looking at today. Although I would encourage anyone who needs that to get in touch with me. The other kind of boundaries are what I would call soft limits. They're preferences, they're requests. You know, it's the way that we would like to experience our relationship. And it comes down to the fact that you can really request anything. But when you make a request, there are two different answers that you can get. One is yes, and one is no. So having boundaries is not just about what you want to ask for, it's then about how you're going to follow through. So questions that I would always be asking around having effective boundaries when it's not about safety, but it's about a preference, are two things. What are you available for? And what are you offering? Because those is where those two things meet. What you're available for and what your ex is available for is going to set the tone for things like how you communicate.
Yes.
You know, are you available for phone calls? Are you available for flexibility? Are you available for people coming in to spend time in each other's homes? You know, that sort of thing. If you're not available for that, then you just have to say so. You know, actually, I'm not happy to talk about this by phone. I'd rather have it in writing. Or, no, I'm not going to invite you over on Christmas Eve because that doesn't feel right for us anymore. And just be clear and be kind. And the other part of it is to then think about what you are offering. So if you know what you want to say no to, think just as carefully about what you're willing to say yes to. And then use that as the basis for a conversation where you can find out what is your ex available for and what are they offering? And where do those things meet? Because that's your boundaries and their boundaries. And you need to understand what that sort of middle zone is, because that's where you make a constructive plan.
This sounds really marvelous. Really grounded, level, clear, and not fraught with the typical, no, this is what I want. Actually, no, I don't want them going to your parents. It could be anyone saying this, by the way. I'm not saying that it's the mother. It can be anybody involved who might say, actually, you know, I'm not available for that.
Yeah.
Like, what happens when you get almost an impasse or someone does say my way or no way, which it depending on the level of intensity and hurt and bitterness and kind of legacy piece in the relationship between the parents, not the children, between the parents, that can be quite intense, can't it?
Yeah, it really can. There are no easy truths to share, but I will just hit you with some hard ones, if that's okay.
Well, that's why we're talking.
Yeah. I think the reality is that when you get to difficult conversations around stuff like birthdays and Christmas and special occasions, what you're going to come up against is a kind of internal conflict between what your life really looks like and what you thought it would look like.
Yeah.
You're going to have that, and so is your ex. And the degree of conflict that you experience really depends upon how honest you are about that conflict. Because if you're going to hold on, or your ex is going to hold on tooth and nail to a vision of family life that you had that doesn't fit with the family that you now are in, it's just going to be miserable for everybody involved, including, unfortunately, your kids. You know, the idea that you would have children and then spend only half of their birthdays with them, or half of their Christmases with them, or whatever you celebrate at this time of year. You know, nobody goes into parenthood thinking, do you know what, I want to do this part-time. Mums don't do that. Dads don't often do that either. You know, it's a difficult thing to come to terms with, the idea that actually the family that you have is not going to look like the one that you thought you wanted. But what you feel about that and what your ex feels about that is no longer it's no longer the business of the other person. So what my kid's dad feels ultimately is no longer my problem. And what I feel is ultimately no longer his problem. Do you see what I mean?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that I would strongly recommend is that if you're really having a hard time this year and it feels gutting, it makes you angry, you feel taken advantage of or taken for granted, or, you know, whatever might be triggering those really big, horrible feelings, is go and take those feelings to somewhere that they're going to be honored. Do not take them to your ex, because it's not your ex's problem how you feel about it. And if you want to be supported, taking those feelings to a place where they can be supported is really important. You know, get listened to, get validated, get understood, get sympathized with, have a mate pop open a bottle of champagne, or, you know, celebrate with you on a different day and make you feel special and seen and heard, or cry into a wine glass, or, you know, have some hot chocolate or whatever you need to do to get through the fact that, you know what, it's not always going to feel fair. And that isn't going to be easy. But when it comes to talking to your ex, the conversation that you need to have is, what am I available for and what am I offering? And it's not a conversation about, how does that make me feel?
And so there'll be people, I imagine, wondering what to do when their children are treated unfairly. It's not about them, it's how their children feel.
Yeah, so advocacy for your kids is really important, and it depends a lot on how old they are. And it depends really how they're expressing that. You know, if they're old enough to say, I know where I want to be on which particular day, then it's really important to give them a voice in that. But at the same time, it may not be possible to just do exactly what they want, because family celebrations need to take account of the wider family.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
You know, they may have grandparents or other relatives that have, you know, limited schedules as well and need to be involved in celebrations. So, you know, advocating for what your kids would like to happen is really important. Also explaining to them that lots of people have a perspective, and family time is about meeting a lot of different people's needs is important. But I think what you were saying about, you know, when people feel that their kids are not treated fairly, I'd like to go a little bit deeper into that. You know, in what way are they not being treated fairly, and what is it that they're uncomfortable with?
Yeah, I mean, I think particularly I have conversations with women when recently I've had conversations with a number of single mothers who've actually had like these children that have felt that daddy's moved on. Mm-hmm. Daddy's moved on, maybe got a new family or a new partner, or, you know, or actually doesn't have anything, mm-hmm. but that doesn't want to engage, actually the children might want to. And these several people I've heard recently, actually, where the children do want to see daddy, that they do want to share time, but actually it's not engaged. They're expressing that, you know, how do you as a parent, therefore, in their mother's positions, we don't have a mechanism where in this country you can say, actually, we need more of you.
Yeah. Well, that's really tricky. And I think the bottom line is that what you would like to be able to get to is helping your kids as they grow up to understand that they also have a choice about what they're offering in every relationship that they have, and teaching them how to offer a relationship with their other parent in a way that feels good for them. When they're little, when they're sort of like 7 and under, you're going to have to do that on their behalf. If you know that their other parent is not engaged and isn't interested and doesn't want to spend time with them, I probably wouldn't say that in any direct way. I'd just be making really lovely plans, telling them this is what we're doing, and just, very matter of fact, this is when you're going to see daddy. As they get older, when they're like 7 to 14, that 8, 9, 10, up to that early teen bit, they're going to have a bit more self-awareness and they might have more of an opinion, but they're not old enough yet to vote with their feet and just decide whether or not they want to engage. So in that space, I would be encouraging them to express what it is that they need, either directly to their dad or other parent, or through me, to their other parent. And, understand that in that advocacy space, unless it's unless it's about safety and you're saying, actually, I don't think that what you're doing with our kids is safe. If it's about their preference, their dad or their other parent is going to have the same choice as they have when they talk to you. They can either demonstrate that they care about that or not. So there is a degree of managing disappointment and managing expectations with your kids.
Well, I think that's actually where I pointed these women to, which is, I know it's where I pointed them to, that actually what they're really doing is managing the disappointment, not necessarily in themselves, although that's for them to sort, not with the children, but in themselves as an adult, but actually how we be with our children when they're disappointed, when they're crestfallen, or they're, what the array of feelings, actually, because I obviously can't name them all, but there's a lot of feelings that children will have and that I've heard about that come from the disappointment of, actually it can be the disappointment of not seeing the parent or not appear, not being as engaged as the child wants, but actually it's what they make of that.
Yes.
It's the way that they then take that story forward.
It is. And I think this is a really key point, actually, that whether your child is disappointed because they don't get to see their other parent, or they're disappointed because they have to go and see their other parent.
Yes, exactly. It can work all sorts of ways.
There are many, many versions of this. I think the important thing is to help them understand that whatever is happening, it's not a judgment on them or on you or on their other parent. Families are complicated things. And even if everybody lives in the same house, they are still complicated things. So as a mum, or any parent, I would be saying the most important thing to do is to resource yourself so that you can be alongside whatever your kid is feeling. Sometimes that means that you are there and present for their disappointment and their pain. Sometimes it means that you have to show up and be present for their excitement and their joy when you're not feeling it. If they come back and they've had an amazing time with their other parent and they've been given gifts that you couldn't possibly give them, and they're really excited about that, and it all feels really wounding, that's hard as well.
Yes.
So whether you're dealing with a kid that's been set up for disappointment, or on the other end of the spectrum, a kid that is having a whale of the time and you're feeling like everything sucks, the things that I think are really important to get in place are to get your diary locked down so that you know where you are and when you have time to yourself. It's really important, and it's something that a lot of separated parents try and put off because they're worried that there'll be conflict in that conversation. Having a diary that is properly organised over this holiday period is your key to freedom. If you know when you have your kids, then you can make plans to do great stuff with them. And if you know when you don't have your kids, you can also make plans to fill your cup back up, doing the stuff that makes you feel good and spending time with people who are going to give you that nurture and that energy that you need to cope with the toing and froing and all of the feelings that might come up around where your kids are or where they can't be with you. So that, the thing about not having a fixed diary, if you're listening to this episode and you haven't fixed your diary yet, get it out, sit down, have that conversation with your ex right now, and just determine, which days of the holiday are they with you? Which days of the holiday are they away from you? And start to make a plan. Because once you know that, the next step is to really, I would say, set a budget, not just financially, but with your energy and also with the fucks that you are prepared to give. Because that is the other element of a happy separated Christmas or holiday. Whatever you're doing, you've really got to think carefully about what you're going to get wound up by and what you're just going to let go. We've only got so many fucks to give, and they cannot be, you can't be in a constant state of enthusiasm or in a constant state of anxiety and stress over this period. It's not healthy for you or your kids.
Or anger or resentment or bitterness. Absolutely. Or, all of those fucks that are about witnessing, observing an ex doing something. I mean, I stress again what you've covered, which is in that first version of boundaries with the safety and protection requirements. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about in the soft boundaries where the preferences, where there is none of those other concerns.
Yeah.
And so safety is all solid, and it's such an important point to make, because I do see, I'm not friends with, but I'm on a single mothers group where I see mothers particularly articulating that they're not sure of the safety of their children. Then they're not sure, which is different from he's asking me to bring fresh clothes every time. And I just don't think that's right.
Yes.
Like, damn it. Why should I do that? And by the way, I'm actually not, I've been there myself, like, hey, they never come back. Yep. Like, what, who's going to buy these? What's going to, all that stuff. I get that can be deeply frustrating, but the fact is that's not a safety issue. Yeah. So it's, again, coming back to your point about we've only got so many fucks to give, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, bottom out. What if you don't see that pair of joggers again? That new pair of joggers, is that a fuck you're going to give? And it may be, actually it represents. So I think sometimes, Nina, it's what does this represent? What was in the relationship that was at the heart of the separation, the decision not to be together? So if it was, for instance, I knew you don't respect me, you never did respect me. See, that joggers, you don't respect me. Yeah. Then everything will be another piece of evidence about that. Yeah. And really, I hear what you're saying, I think, is actually, are you going to pin yourself to that constantly and keep giving a fuck about that? Or are you going to let yourself off that? Are you going to let go of it?
Yeah. I mean, for me, I think one of my least popular phrases with people who've just met me, but my favorite thing with clients who work with me for a really long time, is that the bottom line with almost everything in a separated family is that it comes down to personal responsibility. And when we're first separated from someone that we've had a messy breakup with, we've got kids with, you don't want to be taking responsibility for your own shit. You want the other person to be taking responsibility because that's where the wounding is. If you feel that they've been disrespectful, you want them to own that and suddenly start treating you with respect. But what happens quite often is that we can get stuck in that story and actually continue to be available for situations where we feel disrespected, because it feeds into that story and that sense of, well, I feel vindicated now because look, you've done it again. rather than taking responsibility for our own part in that and saying, do you know what? The relationship's over. This person is who they are. I don't have the right to change them. I've made the decision to leave them. Therefore, I actually have to leave the relationship. And that means stepping away from the drama, stepping away from the fuckery. You know, if you don't want to send a pair of joggers that you're not going to see again, don't send them. You know, make a decision about whether it's more important to send your kid in clothes that you want to see them wearing or send them in clothes that you don't care about coming back. And stand by that decision, because that decision belongs to no one but you, you know? And this is one of the things that is difficult and emotional in the early days, but we don't get to have it every way. You know, we can't say, I want everything about this situation to fit my version of what's going to work. I want to have my kids raised exactly the way that I want them raised and still have a good relationship with this other person that I don't want anything to do with. It's just, that isn't how it works. You know, if our kids are going to have two different parents in two different homes, they're going to have different experiences of what that means to be brought up. And we cannot, I mean, I know a lot of people try, but we cannot, for sanity's sake, keep trying to control or micromanage what that experience is like for our kids when they're not in our home. And when we do that, what we're essentially doing is throwing our energy into a bottomless pit or a black hole. It doesn't come back. You know, our wishes won't always be respected. They won't always be agreed with. They won't even always be understood. So rather than funneling energy into worrying about what your ex is doing, how they are managing their time or their relationship with your shared children, I think it's really powerful to come back instead and say, I'm responsible for my relationship with my children, and I'm responsible for how they feel inside my home and how they experience celebrations and special occasions with me. So I'm going to make damn sure that in my home, on my time, with the resources that I have, me and my children have a really lovely connected time. Because if we have that, then whether or not they have that with their other parent, if they have that with their other parent too, great, that's amazing for our kids. If they don't have that with their other parent, then at least they can come home and lean in to what they do have with me, you know?
Yep.
And when you think about it like that, letting go of how your ex does or doesn't do things and giving less fucks in that direction is not letting them off the hook. You know, it's not giving them permission to just be a crappy parent. What it's doing is saying, I'm giving myself permission to be the best parent I can be by claiming my resources and my energy and all the fucks that I have to give. You know, I'm claiming them for myself, for my own experience with my family, so that my kids benefit from that energy coming from me. And then, you know, especially if you're finding that you're in conflict over petty stuff that ultimately you can just stop happening by a change in your own behavior.
Yeah, say a bit more about that, because that's very powerful, isn't it? When we often look outwards, unfortunately, because it's that personal responsibility piece yet again.
Yeah.
You know, like if only he or she would do this, then this would stop. Whereas really, it's what can I do to affect some change in this situation? What would that tweak be? Or maybe it would be surrendering to something.
I think it depends on the situation. You know, when it comes to following through with a boundary, if it's a preference that you have, for example, and you've asked very nicely for that preference to be respected, and it's either ignored or deliberately disrespected, the next step for taking responsibility for that is, don't get obsessed about how it makes you feel that this person is disrespecting or ignoring your boundary. Start asking yourself, how can I remove myself from the harm that's being caused to me? So if the harm is, you know, I've sent some new clothes and they've not been returned and I feel like I'm throwing money down the drain, then how can you stop that happening? You know, you can stop that happening by asking, first of all, can you stop doing that? But if that gets ignored, the next step is to stop sending things that are expensive. And as your kids get older, teaching them to take a little bit of responsibility themselves for belongings that they care about. You know, you can equip your kids as they get bigger to manage their own belongings, to advocate for themselves a little bit, ask for what they need a little bit, but also be responsible in themselves as well for taking what they want between the homes, and also just being okay with it if they don't. But I mean, there are lots of ways that we can be harmed. You know, for example, belongings is one practical way of looking at it, but other things that quite often happen are, you know, when someone doesn't want to be communicated with in a particular way. This is where it can get quite tricky, because you really have to be firm in your self-esteem to stop participating in the stuff that you don't want to happen anymore. So if you say, I only want to talk about this by email, and your ex then phones you 15 times and texts you and says you're not being fair and it's not okay to not pick up the phone to me and you're breaking my heart and you're ruining my relationship with our kids and you should be doing this the way that I think you should be doing this, that's really hard to just stand your ground. But you might actually need to block their phone number for a while if you genuinely don't want them to contact you like that. And this is where relationships really end. You know, I think we often think that a relationship, when we separate and decide that we're not going to be with somebody anymore, that we say, oh, the relationship's over. But when you share a child, that's not true. The relationship continues. You're just not living together and not sleeping together. You are still in a relationship with your child's other parent. And the hard work is to renegotiate what that relationship is going to include. And often what we have to accept is really difficult, because it means that in order to have a new kind of relationship with the parent of your kid that is letting go of the pain and the hurt and the toxic behavior that led to you breaking up, almost everybody that I've worked with, and in my own experience as well, has to go through a period where your relationship is less than you want it to be. I don't like to say it gets worse before it gets better, because that's not always true, but I think it definitely gets less before it gets better. You cannot go from being in a marriage or a relationship and then go into a cool and collected co-parenting relationship very easily. And if your goal is to become friends long term, you might need to accept that actually the first time you go through really emotional things like organizing your holiday season for the first time in separate houses, one or both of you is going to find that really hard. And you might need to be quite separate and distant from each other to navigate that successfully. And if your boundary is, I don't want to talk about this on the phone because I might get upset, or I don't want you to pop in on Christmas Eve because it's too much, or I don't want to have a present from your parents this year, or send one to your old brother or sister-in-law, whatever it might be. Work out what you're available for and what you are offering. But really bear in mind that your ex is going to have to do this as well. And if it's your ex that is saying, do you know what, I just can't handle talking to you on the phone, and no, I don't want to share special days with you, and I'm not going to send gifts to our wider family this year, and I don't want to share the cost of our child's main Christmas present, I'm going to do it by myself. All of that stuff can be triggering and painful, because what it signifies is another ending in your relationship, which can bring up a lot of the feelings that happened when you originally broke up.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Prepare for that, allow that to be the case, and let yourself feel those feelings. But I'll just go back to what I said before, it's not up to your ex to make you feel better, and it's not up to you to make your ex feel better if either of you are struggling. It's up to you to have a boundary where you say, I'm not available for that. And it's also up to you to take that need for validation and support into the spaces where it's going to be met by your friends, by your family, by loved ones who really can hold you and support you through whatever you need to feel.
Those two questions are critical, aren't they, Nina?
Yes, they really are.
They really are. What are you available for, and what are you offering?
Yeah, it's the foundation to everything. It's foundation to healthy relationships everywhere. You can even ask yourself that with your kids. You know, that is the bottom line of all boundaries, starts with those two questions.
What would you say to anybody that's listening thinking, oh my golly, we're in such a mess. This is not a new divorce or separation. This is, like, oh, how do we unravel? How do we go back? Because we've had many a Christmas and it's not gone well.
You literally start where you are, use what you have, and do what you can. And you can do these shifts at any time. It might feel like another breakup, but I've worked with people who've been separated for upwards of 10 years, and we start this work now. Because if you've never really ended the relationship and redrawn the terms that you're offering, it doesn't matter how long it's been, that's what you need to do. So you just start where you are, and you start with those questions today and give yourself permission to answer them honestly. You're not beholden to your past. No one is. We all did the best that we could with what was in front of us at the time. And we all have the freedom to do better tomorrow and make a different decision. So unhook yourself from the feeling that there are any absolutes. It is what it is, work with what's in front of you right now. Relationships they're not fixed, they're like the ocean. They move all the time, and trying to hold on to them and keep them locked down is a fool's errand. Just move with them and let yourself grow into whatever's coming next.
That sounds exciting put like that, you see, doesn't it?
I think it's exciting. I think my motto with all of this is grow as you go.
Yeah. Yes, it's a remarkable opportunity, actually, if we can unhook enough from the emotions, whatever it is, whether it's anger, frustration, loss. I mean, all the roller coaster of emotions. Frustration's a big one, I think, that I hear a lot and I've experienced. It's if we can see it as growth, it is a fantastic journey that keeps moving, just like our children keep growing and getting older and coming to this co-parenting or not co-parenting. They change so much. It's like, basically it is raising kids. Just when you think it's all settled, it's not.
Yes, it's exactly like that. Co-parenting or parallel parenting, whatever, if your kids have got another parent, then whether you are relating to them as present in your lives or relating to them because they're absent from your lives, there is still a relationship. And I think that's something that a lot of people forget. It doesn't matter whether they're present or absent, there is still a relationship there. So being in a place where you can allow yourself to move and grow and allow your child to move and grow with how that feels over time is really important, because it's not going to always feel the same. Sometimes you're going to be okay with it, and sometimes it's going to be tricky. And sometimes your child will be okay with it, and sometimes they won't be, and they'll find it tricky as well. But I think the gift of all of this for our kids is that when you get to the point as a mum where you can really genuinely enter relationships knowing what you're offering and knowing what you're available for, and being okay with saying no to the things that you don't actually want to participate with, you're modeling that to your kids, and you can teach them how to do that themselves. So as they grow up, they're much more likely to have relationships that are healthy and fulfilling. And I know that for a lot of parents that are coming into a holiday season in a separated situation, and they're confronting all of these grief feelings and stress feelings and, renegotiating what their family is going to look like, it can be really scary thinking, oh God, have we fucked this up? Have we really ruined it for our kids? What's the impact on the kids going to be if we don't sort this out? And I think that the impact on the kids can be really amazing if what you sort out is that you, as an adult, learn how to have a healthy relationship. That's such a gift.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it is such a gift, and it's as much of a gift, if not more, than managing to fulfill the traditional narrative of staying together, and having that kind of pedestaled relationship in our society that doesn't always work. It really doesn't, and it obviously doesn't. So I think I don't see it as a failure. I had somebody say to me the other day, just in passing, it wasn't a serious. I took it seriously because I'm thoughtful about these things. But he said, "So how does it feel to have had a failed marriage?" I was like, "Oh, do you think it was a failure?" I was genuinely like, "Oh."
I don't think any relationship is a failure if learning happened.
Exactly. I was like, I wasn't offended at all, not in any way. But the fact that he said that, I was more interested by his framing of it. I was like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Really? Oh no, you see, I don't see that as a failure. Oh, but how fascinating that. What do you mean about failure of a relationship? I was like, oh my goodness. Yeah. I don't see it that way at all.
I don't either. I mean, I've got 3 beautiful children out of 2 relationships that were in their own ways good at the time. And these beautiful children are part of my life as a result of those relationships. And the amount of personal growth and learning that I have had to do, the amount of responsibility I've had to learn to take for myself and my own actions and my own healing and recovery and expansion and my earning capacity now that I'm a single parent, all of these things, I'm a better mum, a better professional, and a better person because of the relationships that I've had. And I think that's possible for everyone, even when they've had relationships that have been deeply toxic, highly abusive, really unpleasant. There are still gifts that we can take from those experiences if we choose to look in that direction.
Yes, exactly. Yes, I'm completely with you. So I really want to be a voice and join voices that refuse to kind of shame or, say that single motherhood or single parenthood is somehow this awful, sad experience. I mean, sure, there can be sadness in the experience, of course, and many other emotions, but it's not this a devalued, less than position. And we can grow so magnificently, and our children can thrive and are thriving. So it's why I really wanted to make sure that in looking at this subject, that I talk with somebody that clearly is obviously you, that has this perspective on we're not remedial. We're not, we're not families that need like, oh, what a shame that you couldn't know. There's not a shame at all about this situation.
No,
there really isn't.
There's none.
Yeah.
And let's be clear, there is grief and there is loss in every family, whether there are 2 parents in the home or not.
Yes.
The lessons that we learn about moving through difficult life experiences have to be learned one way or another. If you learn them because your relationship with your children's other parent didn't last, that's one way of learning how to cope with transition and change. There are a lot of ways of learning that. This isn't better or worse than any other. It's just a journey that we can embrace or resist. And trust me, like when change comes, people resist it in so many ways. And, you can resist it at work. You can resist it in your friendships. You can resist it in your health. Like the bottom line is that nothing is static. Relationships and life are going to change. If you are in a single parent family, you've just experienced that in one area of your life, and it's no worse or better than experiencing it anywhere else. I don't see it as this like defining characteristic of the way that I parent particularly. Obviously it is very significant because it's the way that my children experience their lives, but it's not the only factor in their life. There are so many things that make up the richness of our family experience. And that's true of anyone with a single parent family or a coupled family. Your family is just the crucible that you all grow in. And it can look 100 different ways. But the thing that's important is it healthy? Are the people in it healthy? Are the people in it happy? And that doesn't depend upon who lives in the same four walls. That depends upon whether you are able to express yourself clearly, respect yourself first and foremost, and respect each other in the relationships that you have. And I think those two questions really are the foundation.
They absolutely are.
Doing it.
Oh, Nina, this has been a wonderful conversation. I know that your guidance and our dialogue will have really, I know will have really helped. And I'll put all your the ways that we can get in touch with you, that listeners can be in touch with you, in the show notes, as I always do. And I'm sure you'll be contacted. I have a little hunch on that. It's been beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Danisha. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Listeners, what did you think of our conversation? I'm really hoping you're feeling more supported to have the Christmas that you want. That's it then. Till next week. Really hope you're taking care of yourself. Stay safe. Loads of love.
Thank you for tuning in to the School for Mothers podcast. To continue the conversation and keep your dose of inspiration up, head over to schoolformothers.com/podcast, where you'll find bonus content from Danusha and her guests on habits, recommendations, books, best apps, time-saving secrets, life hacks, health, sleep and anything in between. That's schoolformothers.com/podcast.